In 1956 Harlem, a nightclub owner looked Bumpy Johnson in the eye and said no. Not maybe. Not later. Not after the weekend crowd. He said no. 3 days later, his club was still open. The lights were still glowing. The bandstand was polished. The glasses were lined in perfect rows. But every table was empty. No raid. No shootout. No smashed windows. No blood on the floor. Just silence. And in Harlem, silence could be more dangerous than bullets. Because this wasn't the story of a man who got beaten in the street. This was the story of a man who was erased in public, while the whole neighborhood watched it happen, one chair at a time. And the strangest part? Bumpy Johnson barely had to touch him. So how do you destroy a nightclub without burning it down? How do you bury a man while his sign is still lit? And why did the owner come back 3 nights later, ready to beg for a deal he once called an insult? That answer begins with a room full of music, and one sentence that should never have been spoken aloud. The club was called the Velvet Note. It sat on 132nd Street like it had money in its bones. Blue neon in the front window, golden curtains behind the stage, a piano so polished it reflected the chandelier like water reflects moonlight. On Friday nights, the room breathed. Trumpets cried, glasses clinked, women in satin laughed into the smoke. Men with folded bills and careful secrets leaned over candlelit tables like the night belonged to them. And for a while, it did. The owner of the Velvet Note was a man named Nathaniel Price. Most people called him Nate. He was 38, sharp suits, clean shoes, voice smooth enough to calm a drunk and cut through an argument at the same time. He wasn't born rich. He wasn't born connected. He built the club with borrowed money, long nights, and a promise he made to his late wife when she was dying in a hospital bed 2 winters earlier. One day, he told her, "I'll build a place with music so beautiful, it makes people forget they're hurting." That promise became wood and velvet and brass. And for 11 good months, the Velvet Note stayed full. But Harlem in 1956 had rules older than business licenses, older than neon signs, older than dreams. And one of those rules was simple. If your room made money under Bumpy Johnson's sky, Bumpy knew about it. The first message came on a Tuesday afternoon. No shouting, no threats, no grand entrance. Just a man named Jerome Tate walking in like he already knew the layout. Dark overcoat, gray hat, soft steps. The kind of face people forgot too quickly, which made him dangerous. Nate was at the bar checking receipts with his bookkeeper, Odessa Lane, when Jerome sat on the last stool and ordered coffee instead of whiskey. That alone told Nate this wasn't social. Jerome stirred the cup once and said, "Nice room." Nate smiled politely. "Thank you." Jerome looked toward the stage. "Bumpy likes rooms that stay nice." There it was. Odessa stopped writing. Nate didn't. Jerome kept his voice low. "Every place that earns under peace contributes to peace. That's how Harlem stays Harlem." Nate closed the ledger. "How much?" Jerome named a number. It wasn't impossible. It wasn't even outrageous by the standards of the street, but it was enough to sting. Enough to remind a man that his name on the deed didn't mean what he thought it meant. Nate leaned back and gave the kind of laugh men use when pride speaks before wisdom. "You tell Bumpy Johnson I'm running a nightclub, not a charity." Jerome didn't flinch. "It's not charity." "Then tell him it's still no." For the first time, Jerome looked directly into Nate's eyes. And what Nate saw there unsettled him. Not anger, not offense, not even surprise. Just disappointment. Like a teacher hearing the wrong answer from a student who still had time to correct himself. Jerome stood. "Mr. Price," he said quietly, "in this neighborhood, people don't lose businesses all at once. First they lose favors, then they lose rhythm, then they lose the room." He placed coins beside the untouched coffee and left. Odessa waited until the door shut. Then she whispered, "You should fix that." Nate snapped the ledger shut harder than he meant to. "I built this place myself." Odessa looked at him for a long second. "No," she said. "You built the walls. Harlem filled the chairs." That night, Nate told himself it was handled. Men like Jerome carried messages for a living. Messages sounded bigger than they were. If he gave in once, he'd be giving in forever. And the velvet note had finally reached the point where it could stand on its own. At least, that's what he told himself. The room was packed that night. His headline singer, Delilah Snow, wore silver silk and sang like heartbreak had learned perfect timing. At table 6 sat the dentist from Lenox Avenue with a woman who was not his wife. At table 9, a numbers runner laughed too loudly over cards and bourbon. Near the back wall, 3 out-of-town men from Chicago kept asking for the trumpet player's name. The money was good. Maybe Jerome had been bluffing. Maybe Bumpy had bigger things to worry about than one stubborn club owner protecting his pride. Then, just before midnight, the front door opened, and Bumpy Johnson walked in. No fanfare. No bodyguards crowding the room. No raised voice. But the temperature changed. Even Delilah noticed. Her note bent for half a second. Bumpy stood in the doorway wearing a dark overcoat and a fedora tipped low. Small framed, still calm. He didn't need size. The room gave him space the way water gives space to a boat cutting through it. He looked at the stage. He looked at the bar. He looked at the full tables. Then his eyes found Nate. Bumpy walked over alone. He didn't sit, didn't smile, didn't threaten. He simply said, "You've got a beautiful room." Nate kept his chin high. "I know." Bumpy nodded once, like he respected nerve when he saw it. Then he said something Nate would remember for the rest of his life. "Let's see who it belongs to by Friday." And he left. That was all. No broken glass, no police, no violence. Just one sentence. And somehow, it felt worse. Wednesday arrived dressed like a normal day. That was the first problem. No storm, no warning, no visible punishment. The flower delivery for the front tables never came, but Nate shrugged it off. The fish order arrived 2 hours late, but the chef improvised. The bartender, Rufus Hale, mentioned that 2 regulars had canceled their standing reservations for the evening. Nate said people get busy. By 8 p.m., the room was still half full. Not bad, not great, but not disaster. Then Delilah came downstairs from the dressing room with her lipstick still uncapped and said, "My pianist isn't here." "Where is he?" "He sent word. Says he's sick." The drummer arrived 20 minutes late. The trumpet player never came at all. A replacement trio was pulled together from men who knew half the songs and none of the cues. The music sounded tired. And a tired room spends less money. At table 3, a couple left before the second set. At table 7, a birthday party cut their order in half and went downtown for dancing. A man Nate knew well from the garment district leaned close and murmured, "Heard Vice might be watching this place." That rumor traveled through the room faster than smoke. By closing time, Wednesday had not killed the velvet note, but it had scratched it. And scratches matter when people are already listening for cracks. Thursday morning, Nate decided he would fight smart. Not scared. Smart. He placed extra ads, sent a boy to hand out cards on 7th Avenue, promised Delilah a bonus if she held the room together through the weekend, paid the kitchen staff early to keep morale clean, told Odessa to prepare for a smaller margin and a bigger comeback. Then an old promoter named Victor Sloan arrived with a sharkskin suit and a smile that never reached his eyes. Victor worked both sides of the city. Midtown rooms, downtown gamblers, white money that liked black music as long as it could leave before sunrise. He spoke softly. "I hear you and Bumpy are having a disagreement." Nate didn't answer. Victor glanced around the club. "You don't need Harlem if you've got uptown tourists and downtown spenders. I can bring in a new crowd." "For what price?" Victor smiled wider. "Every rescue has one." He wanted ownership without calling it ownership, influence without signing papers. The kind of deal a desperate man confuses with salvation. Odessa hated him on sight. After he left, she said, "That man smells like foreclosure." But Nate was rattled now. Rattled men do dangerous arithmetic. He told himself he wasn't choosing Victor. He was only keeping options open. That evening he made another mistake. He reserved 6 of the best tables for Victor's guests. Regulars came in and found their seats missing. People who had supported the Velvet Note from its opening week were suddenly standing by the bar, while strangers from downtown got the good view. Harlem notices disrespect faster than it notices style. And by the time Delilah stepped under the spotlight Thursday night, the room looked polished, but offended. She sang anyway, and for one brilliant minute, it almost worked. Her voice poured over the room like honey over cracked glass. People turned. Forks paused. Even Nate felt the hope rise in his chest. Maybe music could still save this. Maybe beauty could outrun politics. Maybe people would remember why they came here in the first place. Then the front table stood up in the middle of her second verse and walked out. Not loudly, not angrily, just left. Then the next table followed. Then another. A waiter came whispering to Nate, "2 more cancellations by telephone. They said not tonight." Delilah kept singing to a room that was becoming emptier by the minute. When she finished, the applause sounded thin, nervous, almost apologetic. She came off stage with tears she refused to let fall. "What is happening?" she whispered. Nate looked past her into the room. He saw empty candle holders, untouched glasses, a dance floor waiting for feet that never arrived. And for the first time, he understood something terrible. This was organized, but not in the way he expected. No one was attacking the Velvet Note. They were withdrawing from it. And before we go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe, because what happened on the third day was colder than anything Nate Price imagined. Late that night, Delilah found Nate alone in the office, counting losses that didn't look fatal on paper yet, but felt fatal in the room. She closed the door behind her. "I got an offer," she said. Nate didn't look up. "From who?" She hesitated. He looked up anyway. He already knew. Bumpy? No, not from him directly. That means yes. She sat across from him and folded her gloves in her lap. My little brother owes money, she said. Bad money. The kind that doesn't wait. Tonight, somebody paid his debt. Nate went still. In exchange for what? She held his gaze. For me not singing here on Friday. Silence. Then Nate laughed once, bitter and empty. So that's it? He buys my singer? Delilah's voice cracked. He bought my brother another month alive. That landed harder than any threat could. Because now it wasn't business. Now it was gravity. A whole neighborhood leaning where one man pointed. Nate wanted to be angry at her. He wanted to call it betrayal. But the truth was more painful. She wasn't choosing Bumpy over him. She was choosing family over pride. And Nate understood that better than he wanted to. After she left, he stayed in the office until dawn with Odessa, who finally said what she had been holding back since Tuesday. You keep talking like this is extortion, she said. Maybe it is, but that's not the whole thing. What else is it? Belonging. Nate rubbed his face. Belonging doesn't come with a bill. In Harlem it does, Odessa said. Sometimes in cash, sometimes in loyalty, sometimes in names you call when trouble starts. She leaned forward. You thought because the room was beautiful, it was yours alone. That's your mistake. Nate stared at the ledger. He had numbers, but suddenly numbers felt childish. Because there are economies that never appear on paper. Friday morning came heavy. No pianist, no trumpet, no floral delivery, no premium bourbon from the distributor who always arrived early, no fresh oysters, no callback from the printer for weekend flyers. And by noon, Nate heard that 2 cab drivers on the avenue were telling couples to skip the velvet note because something was off over there. Something was off. That was how Harlem said a place was dying before it was dead. At 2 p.m., Nate finally did what proud men do too late. He sent a boy to find Jerome Tate. The boy returned an hour later with a message. Mr. Tate says Mr. Johnson is busy. He says Friday night will answer your question better than any meeting. Nate nearly broke the glass in his hand. By sunset, even the kitchen staff had gone quiet. Rufus polished glasses nobody was asking for. The chef cut portions smaller to stretch what inventory remained. Odessa sat at the front desk with a reservation book that suddenly looked like a graveyard of crossed-out names. Then Nate's daughter, Ivy, came downstairs. She was 16, too observant for her age. She had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of pretending not to be scared. She looked around the room, being prepared for a crowd that did not exist. Are we in trouble? She asked. Nate wanted to lie. Instead, he said, We're in a hard week. She nodded slowly. Then she said something that undid him. Mom used to say people can hear fear before they hear music. He looked away so she wouldn't see what that did to him. Because suddenly, this wasn't about Bumpy, or money, or territory. It was about a promise to a dead woman, slipping through his fingers while the chandeliers still shone. If you like this story, subscribe my channel for more beautiful stories. By 9 p.m. Friday, the velvet note should have been overflowing. It was payday in Harlem. Cold enough for coats, warm enough for trouble. Perfect night for music. Nate stood near the entrance in his best suit and watched people approach the club. Slow down, look through the window, and keep walking. Again and again, and again. A couple reached for the door, then noticed who was sitting in the parked car across the street. Jerome Tate. He wasn't blocking the entrance. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was just there, watching. The couple turned around. At 9:20, 3 businessmen from downtown entered, looked around at the half-empty room, and immediately asked if this was the right place. They stayed for one drink and left before the first song ended. At 9:45, Delilah's replacement singer forgot the lyrics to her opening number because the silence in the room was making her panic. At 10 p.m., the great Friday night crowd of the Velvet Note consisted of one traveling salesman nursing rye at the bar, 2 older women sharing a plate of catfish, a tired couple arguing in whispers near the back wall, and Victor Sloan, smiling like a vulture who had arrived early. The rest of the tables sat under candlelight like abandoned promises. Empty. Beautifully, brutally empty. And that was when Nate understood the true shape of power. Power wasn't always a man with a gun. Sometimes it was a full room yesterday and an empty room today. Sometimes it was the knowledge that every waiter, every singer, every supplier, every driver, every gambler, every regular customer in a 10-block radius had heard a message without ever hearing it spoken aloud. Do not help this room breathe. Let it suffocate politely. Victor Sloan approached with his drink in hand. Still time, he said. Sell me 40%. I'll move the room downtown by spring. New name, new crowd, new protection. Nate stared at him. For one ugly second, the offer sounded merciful. Then he looked around. At Rufus pretending to wipe the same counter for 10 straight minutes. At Odessa sitting upright so the staff wouldn't collapse emotionally. At Ivy peeking from the stairwell, seeing her father lose something she was too young to name. At the stage where his wife's favorite song had once made the whole room cry. And he realized Victor wasn't offering rescue. He was offering burial in a nicer suit. Nate set his glass down. No. Victor's smile disappeared. You may not get another chance. Nate nodded toward the door. Neither will you if you're still sitting here in 10 seconds. Victor left offended, but the room stayed empty. By 11:10, Nate closed the kitchen. By 11:30, he sent half the staff home. At 11:45, Delilah's replacement singer walked off the stage mid-set because singing to vacant tables felt like humiliation dressed as employment. And at midnight, Nate Price stood in the middle of the Velvet Note while every candle still burned, and every chair still accused him. He had refused Bumpy Johnson on Tuesday. By Friday, Bumpy had taken nothing from the building. He had simply proved that Nate did not own the people who made it matter. At 12:20 in the morning, after closing the doors to a room that never truly opened, Nate told Odessa to take Ivy home. Odessa hesitated. And you? I'm going to settle it. With who? He gave her a look that answered everything. Harlem after midnight had its own pulse. Windows dark, music leaking from basements, footsteps that meant one thing on one block and another thing on the next. Jerome was waiting outside a late-night restaurant on 7th Avenue as if he had expected this exact hour. He opened the back door of a black sedan without a word. Nate got in. No one searched him. No one spoke to him. The car drove 3 blocks north and stopped outside a brownstone with one light on upstairs. Inside, Bumpy Johnson was seated at a small dining table with tea instead of liquor,
reading as if the night had not just swallowed another man's pride whole. He motioned for Nate to sit. Nate remained standing. "You made your point." Bumpy turned a page. "Did I?" "You emptied my club." Bumpy looked up then. "No," he said softly. "Harlem emptied your club." Nate's jaw tightened. "Because you told it to." Bumpy studied him for a long moment. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "I only removed what I had been giving you." Nate frowned. Bumpy folded his hands. "When you opened the velvet note, your liquor account got extended."
Your first piano arrived on time. Your permits stopped disappearing inside city offices. The union boys left your deliveries alone. Musicians took less money the first month because they were told your room mattered. Couples heard it was safe. Tourists heard it was elegant. Regulars heard it respected the neighborhood. He leaned back. You thought all that was normal. Nate said nothing, because he hadn't known. Or maybe he had known just enough to pretend not to know. Bumpy continued. "I didn't ask for your money because I was hungry, Mr. Price. I asked because no room in Harlem stands alone. Not yours, not anybody's. You were eating from a table bigger than your own." That hit harder than humiliation, because buried inside it was a truth Nate had spent years avoiding. His success had not been individual. It had been communal, messy, complicated, unspoken, but communal. Nate finally sat down. "So what now?" he asked. Bumpy's answer came without drama. "Now you decide whether the velvet note is just your business or part of this neighborhood." Nate waited. Bumpy continued. "The cut stays. But half of what you pay goes where it should have gone already. Local musicians, kitchen families when shifts run short, winter coal for 3 buildings on your block. And every Sunday, your stage opens for young singers who can't buy their way into downtown rooms." Nate blinked. That was not the deal he expected. "You're asking me to fund goodwill?" Bumpy almost smiled. "I'm asking you to stop confusing profit with ownership." The room went quiet. Then Nate asked the question he should have asked on Tuesday. "If I say yes, does the room come back?" Bumpy lifted his teacup. "Not because I command it," he said. "Because people know when a place has remembered who it belongs with." There was one more beat of silence. Then Nate stood, reached into his coat, pulled out the envelope he should have handed over 3 days earlier, and placed it on the table. Bumpy didn't touch it right away. Instead, he said, "One more thing." Nate waited. "Lose Victor Sloan." That surprised him. Bumpy saw it. "Men like him don't save Harlem rooms," Bumpy said. "They skin them." For the first time all week, Nate let out a real breath. "Done." Bumpy nodded once. The meeting was over. No threat, no handshake, no celebration. Just terms. And in that plain exchange, Nate understood something most men learn too late. The city was not ruled only by violence. It was ruled by invisible permissions. Saturday night, the first sign came before sunset. The flowers arrived. Fresh ones. Then the bourbon shipment. Then the pianist. Then the trumpet player who had suddenly recovered. Then Delilah Snow herself, standing in the doorway with a garment bag in one hand and apology in her eyes. My brother's safe, she said. Nate nodded. Then sing. By 8 p.m., the first regular couple returned. By 8:30, table 6 was occupied. By 9, the bar was 3 deep. By 9:20, the room sounded alive again. Not just loud, but alive, which is different. Alive means people are leaning forward. Alive means strangers are smiling at each other between songs. Alive means pain has made room for pleasure without pretending pain doesn't exist. At 10 p.m., Delilah stepped into the spotlight, and the velvet note became what Nate had promised his wife it would be. A room that made hurting people forget for a while. Only now it carried a truth he would never again ignore. The room was his to manage, but never his alone to claim. He saw Odessa watching the crowd with tired satisfaction. Rufus finally laughing behind the bar. Ivy at the stairwell smiling for the first time in days. Young musicians in the back waiting for their Sunday chance. And Nate knew the lesson had cost him 3 days, but saved him years. Because if Bumpy Johnson had chosen violence, Nate might have called himself a victim forever. But Bumpy chose silence. And silence forced honesty. People later told the story different ways. Some said Bumpy ruined the club and rebuilt it to prove a point. Some said Nate Price got taught the price of arrogance. Some said Harlem protected its own and punished the ones who forgot what its own really meant. All of them were partly right. But the truth was simpler. A man mistook a neighborhood for a market. He thought customers were customers, suppliers were suppliers, musicians were musicians, protection was protection. He forgot that in places built under pressure, everything is tied to everything else. The food, the music, the money, the rumors, the warmth, the fear, the loyalty. He forgot that a full room is never just a full room. It is trust made visible. And once trust leaves, even the most beautiful place starts to look haunted. Years later, old-timers in Harlem would still point at the velvet note and tell younger men, "That's the room that went quiet in one night." They'd say Bumpy Johnson didn't need to break the owner. He only needed to show him the shape of emptiness. And maybe that was the colder lesson. Because bullets end stories quickly. Silence makes a man sit inside the lesson until he finally understands it. If you like this story, subscribe my channel for more beautiful stories. And remember this: real power is not always the loudest man in the room. Sometimes it is the man who can empty the room and fill it again. Bumpy Johnson understood that. Nathaniel Price never forgot it. And Harlem? Harlem heard the message without anyone saying it twice.